This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's fair to say the Internal Revenue Service doesn't have a lot of superfans, but they do have a customer service department whose employees are committed to answering questions and helping taxpayers clear up mistakes, theirs or ours. The thing is, since DOGE stormed through the agency a year and a half ago and cut something like 30% of IRS staff jobs, just getting through to a living, breathing human on the phone can feel like winning the lottery. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. My guest received a scary letter from the tax service this spring, alleging she and her husband hadn't paid everything they owed for 2025. It turned out to be an error. The IRS had failed to credit them for some quarterly payments they had made, and since she had documentation, she assumed it would be a relatively easy fix. It was not, and since Stephanie Mensimer happens to be a senior reporter in the Washington Bureau of Mother Jones magazine, her experience inspired a story about how the agency is now barely able to handle regular business in the wake of staffing cuts. It's titled, "The IRS is Imploding." Stephanie, welcome to Think.
Thanks for having me.
Start by talking about what led you to this reporting project. You had never had troubles with the IRS before. Then you got this letter dated in May saying you owed a lot of money. What exactly was in that letter and what made you feel like you needed to act on it quickly?
Well, they said that I, owed thousands of dollars, which I didn't owe, and so of course, I think everyone feels like they've been terrified by a letter like that at some point in their lives. Like the IRS is kind of scary. They have a lot of power. They can, mess up your life if they want to in certain ways, and so I decided to jump on the phone and give them a call, and that turned out to be an impossible task. I spent hours and hours and hours on hold or getting disconnected with the IRS over the course of at least a month. And I never even still, I think it's been a couple months since I got the letter. I have still not been able to contact anyone at the agency about my issue.
The IRS failed to credit those quarterly payments you'd made. I mean, mistakes can happen in any big organization. Was there anything about that, though, that made you think the agency is not firing on all cylinders at the moment? Like it's not just that you can't get the mistake fixed. There was a mistake in the first place.
Right. Well, I think that what was odd, I have paid those things online. I have an IRS account, and actually, this was probably the first year I've paid online, and now, of course, never going to do it again. But in my IRS account, it won't show any payments that I made before 2026, and the numbers that they do have in there didn't even match up with the letter that they sent me. So I was like, this is really strange. Something has gone terribly wrong, and I actually last year had written a story about the IRS because I'm from Ogden, Utah, and in Ogden they have a giant IRS service center that handles a lot of the, anything you mail the IRS. If you're west of the Mississippi, will probably go through Ogden, and so everyone I know has worked there at some time or another, family members and whatnot. And last year, when Doge came in and they started just slashing the staff, I did a story about what that meant for my hometown. And back then, people were saying, oh, they're doing this during tax season. It's going to be such a disaster. How could they do this? And it turned out that last year wasn't actually that bad because all the people that they were trying to get rid of didn't actually leave the agency until like October because they kept them on through the tax season. And then they gave people this like deferred resignation thing where they paid them not to work for a couple of months and then fired them. So the impact of those cuts really didn't become clear, at least I think on the public facing side, until this year. And so when I started having problems, I thought, oh, this is what everybody said was going to happen. And it's happening now.
I mean, after that first long wait on hold, you tried again a few days later. And at that point, you couldn't even stay on hold if you had wanted to. Like you longed for the days of being on hold.
Right. They have this outgoing message that said, due to overwhelming call volume, we're unable to even put you on hold. And it wasn't just me. I asked my accountant finally. I was like, "Do you guys have some way to do this? Do you have some advice for me?" And they said, "Oh, we can't get through either." And they have their own sort of like special bat phone thing that tax practitioners can get around. They have a special direct line to the IRS to help people with their problems, and even those lines aren't getting answered the way they should be.
All right, so let's talk about why all of this is happening. First, there is no confirmed IRS commissioner in place within the Trump administration.
Right. They had sort of acting people. I think they had one briefly confirmed commissioner who wasn't there very long, and then there's been some acting people, and then finally they made a fake job. They made the CEO of the IRS, and it's not a job that was ever created or authorized by Congress. I'm not sure, like legally, even how that works, but they put in a guy, Frank Bisignano, who also is running the Social Security Administration. So he's got a lot of time on his hands. And, I think that there is some lack of management at the top because of that. Those are two major public agencies in the country. And yeah, they have not had, and I don't even think they're trying anymore to find somebody who could be confirmed.
So Congress is not taking action to press to find a leader for the agency who would be confirmed?
No, they do not seem to be.
And does the IRS CEO, you've called this a made up job, have all the same powers as someone who had been through a full Senate confirmation process?
I don't think so, but I really don't know because this is highly unprecedented. And I think Senator Elizabeth Warren has made some noise about this, saying, what legal authority does he have to do anything? Um, and she's written some stern letters or something, but I don't think it's really, I mean, he testified before Congress in April. They did bring him in to talk about what was happening with the agency, and there was some oversight. And he just claimed that everything was going great and that they've lost 30% of the staff at the IRS, but they were doing more with fewer people and getting better results.
That's just not the experience of anyone who's been dealing with the IRS for the past few months. Is that accurate?
That is true. And in fact, since I wrote my story, I keep hearing from even more people about this. But I interviewed a number of tax practitioners, a lot of people who work with low-income taxpayers through they're like kind of like legal aid clinics for taxes. And they are just ready to pull their hair out because they just, where they used to spend time working with clients and trying to work out payment arrangements or help them with their paperwork and stuff. Now they just sit on hold with the IRS because they can't get through to anybody. And one woman I talked to, she said at this point now, when she has a really serious problem for one of her clients, she just goes straight to Congress. She
Wow.
goes to see her, and she literally goes in person to, or she did at least once go in person to visit her congressman to talk to them, because members of Congress have some kind of direct line. They have a way of getting through some of the bureaucracy to help people, like their constituent services offices do. And so I think they're definitely hearing from people because at least, the lawyers, people who know that this is an option, are taking advantage of it more often because they're just so frustrated.
Only once in my life have I had a kind of scary interaction with the IRS. This was many, many years ago. And I recognize that, the IRS is not set up to, maintain Americans' emotional well-being. But when you have a problem like this, like the one that you had, more than anything, you just want to start getting it taken care of as soon as possible. And this seems like something that is just not possible in the current state.
Yeah, I mean, I tried. It's funny when you get stuck on hold, they say try going online to solve this problem. And of course, I tried that, and the website seems to also be broken. I keep getting these messages that say, due to an outage, you can't see any of your payment information. It doesn't even show me having a balance that I owe. Balance information not available. So the website is of no use. And I had my husband try to log in. He doesn't have anything really that was useful. So that doesn't work. You can't call. So I thought, well, and my accountant was like, oh, you're going to have to send a letter. So I thought, okay, great. So we've been working on this letter and putting together all my documentation. And then I was reading through the IRS's own data, and it shows that just in the last year, the amount of mail that they are not processing has more than doubled. So it went from like all the unopened mail, unprocessed amended tax returns went from something like 3 million pieces to 7 this year. And so I'm going to send a letter, but I don't know who's going to open it. It's that sort of a problem. Like I will do it. So there will be a record that I have tried to solve this, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
That part of your story reminded me of that final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they take the Ark of the Covenant, this precious artifact, and it gets stored away somewhere in a warehouse, never to be seen again.
Right, right. And, except there are real consequences for people who can't reach the IRS. I mean, I hope one day I will solve my problem. I think I've been told thanks to doing the story, I learned that you can ask for a hearing. You are allowed, there's a taxpayer bill of rights basically built into the law, and you're allowed to get a hearing if you can't get anywhere with all the other options. So they can't start doing anything without you being able to talk to somebody eventually. But if you ignore the IRS and don't pay money they say you owe, or don't respond to these letters, they can take your house or take your bank account. They can garnish your wages. I mean, they have real power to try to collect this money if they think that you owe it. And so, there are consequences if you just ignore the letters, or you just think, I don't know what to do. I can't talk to anybody on the phone. I'll just pretend like this isn't happening. They have a lot of power, and those things, some of it's automated. I got another letter that just seemed to come. It came before the deadline of my needing to respond to the previous letter. So I think they still send out things, and they probably still can garnish your wages. And some stuff is still happening, even though they don't have many people working there. So it's just that when you get these things, you have no way of responding.
And you discovered the people, generally speaking, who are most likely to have their wages garnished or their property seized are people who are already vulnerable in this country for a number of reasons.
I mean, pretty much anybody who's not good with technology, or who doesn't have like a scanner, for instance, will run into trouble trying to respond to the IRS. Elderly people whose first language isn't English, and low income people generally who don't have time like I did to sit on hold all day. I mean, you can start calling the IRS at like 7 o'clock in the morning, but most people have to go to work. People don't have this kind of time to spend just trying to reach someone in the agency to get help. So those people are definitely vulnerable to this kind of stuff. They also there's sort of the dual problem that low-income people are really vulnerable to fraud from crooked tax preparers, which I hadn't thought about till I started doing the story. But there are these shady tax preparers who tell people they can get them really big refunds, and they do stuff that is illegal, basically. And so people fall for that. They get this big refund, and then a couple months later, the IRS comes back and is like, no, that actually isn't your refund, and you're not eligible for all that money, and you need to give it back. At which point, a lot of people have already spent it, and they're in big trouble, and they need to figure out how to resolve these things. And there are options for people. They have payment plans, and there are hardship exemptions. And if your loser ex-husband illegally claimed your children on his tax returns, like those are all mitigating things that the IRS will work with you on. But you can only work on those things if you can get somebody to talk to you on the phone.
Stephanie, what did you learn about how the process of DOGE cuts went down at the IRS, how it affected operations and staffing?
Well, they basically cut 30% of the workforce at the IRS in an extremely short period of time. And, one of the deep, dark secrets about the federal civil service is that there were a lot of people who were already eligible for retirement at this point. And they had stayed on because they're, people like to work in public service or whatever. They had, they were there. But once DOGE came in and started, they started firing people, they got rid of probationary employees. and whatnot, there was a wholesale loss of institutional memory that also went out the door with that. And so they have made it very hard for the agency to function. And and it's a central feature of the federal government, which is collecting tax revenue, which, they need to pay for things like, the war in Iran or, food stamps, whatever. You need to bring in that revenue. And so uh, I don't think that the Doge people really gave much thought to how to make the cuts. I actually interviewed the former HR director from the IRS who had been brought in to help hire people because in 2022, I think Biden helped push through the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a bunch of new money to try to shore up the IRS, which has been problematic for a long time. It's been starved for resources. The technology was outdated, and it just needed more bodies. And so Tracy DeMartini she was brought in to start hiring people, and she tried to work with the Doge people and said, look, I can help you reach your numbers if you tell me what it is that you want. Like, what are you trying to do here? And they ended up just firing her or pushing her out instead of like taking sort of a strategic approach and thinking like, what could we do to make this more efficient? Or are there places that are overstaffed that we could cut and, keep some core functions? There was just none of that. It was just, they just came in and started firing everybody.
To go back for a minute to the mail issue, you talked to a guy named Charles Garn who was hired to work in an IRS mail facility in 2024 and I guess survived the Doge layoffs. What sort of climate did he describe there in the wake of that?
Oh, he said it was awful. He was so excited to go to work there too. I had met him when he just started, and he was one of these new people brought in on some of that, with that new money from the Inflation Reduction Act. And he had just gotten all trained at the end of 2024. And like, I think he started work in December. And by February, Doge was trying to get rid of him because he was considered a probationary employee. And it was easier to fire those people. So he was there for all of the crazy stuff, like when they forced everybody to come back to work in the office. The IRS had long had really flexible telework policies, and so they stopped all of that. And so all these people who hadn't worked in the building a really long time came in, and they didn't have desks, they didn't have anywhere to park. They were all squashed together or working in broom closets. And so he came in for some of that, and he just watched as he told me he had like his manager would manage like a certain number of teams, maybe like three. But as time went by, the manager was managing like 9 teams, and then the managers would quit because they were so overworked. And some of them actually quit because they didn't want to have to fire everybody. Like, it was really brutal, just sort of psychologically, to have to look at your coworkers and be like, "Sorry, you guys all have to go." And he said by the end, also, they were just falling incredibly behind at managing the mail. They used to get these big deliveries of boxes full of paper. And he said, they have 2 shifts there. So that by the end of the day, they would have, processed everything that came in when he started. But when he left in October, he said they just couldn't they were not finishing the deliveries. Stuff was backing up. And even though they were working harder, it was just not helping. And then people just kept leaving.
This is going to sound like a rhetorical question, but it's not. What do you know about why President Trump hates the IRS?
Well, I think that the IRS was auditing him for quite a while. I think, he has himself done some alleged tax fraud. And I think that even also he thinks they leaked his tax returns, but it wasn't actually the IRS. It was a contractor who leaked his tax returns a few years ago. So he was angry about that. But I think this was more than just President Trump. I'm not even sure how aware he was of what was happening, because Elon Musk came in with Doge and really got kind of free reign. They sent these kids in to work in these agencies. They had no idea what they were doing and no idea how these places worked. And they thought they were so smart. And they just came in and with real contempt for public workers. And they just thought they were going to make it all, either they could do it with technology and fix everything really quickly, or they just didn't see why we should even have these functions. And of course, there's a very powerful constituency of wealthy people that really don't want the IRS to function because they don't want to get audited and have to pay their fair share of taxes.
I have wondered, I mean, is there revenue being lost due to staffing shortages and failure to catch tax cheats? Like, is there any way to know what kind of income the federal government might be missing out on by starving the Internal Revenue Service?
It's an astronomical amount of money. I think the Yale Budget Lab has figured that it's almost $1 trillion that the country will lose in tax revenue over the next 10 years because of these cuts. It's a lot of money. And it's really insidious because it's like partly an enforcement thing, if people aren't getting audited and there's no check. But I think they're helping create this culture. And I heard this while I was writing my story. It's like, well, no one works at the IRS. Why should I even bother filing my tax returns? Or, why should I worry about this? Why should I pay taxes even if nobody's going to catch me? And I think that the longer this goes on, the worse that's going to get. And, these revenue shortfalls could get even worse.
The president and some Republican lawmakers have alleged the IRS as an agency is biased against political conservatives or at least conservative organizations. Is that concern borne out by evidence? Like, is that a reasonable thing to at least wonder about?
Well, there was an episode in the mid-aughts, and I think it was 2012 somewhere. It was during the Obama administration where the Tea Party movement that sprang up after Obama was elected ended up creating a whole bunch of new political nonprofits. And the IRS did actually, I don't want to say they targeted them, but they did focus on those groups because they were crossing a lot of lines between, political. If you're a nonprofit, there are rules about what kind of political activity you can engage in. And so the IRS did actually go after a couple of Tea Party groups at the time. And then there were all these hearings, and the woman who worked at the IRS who was in charge of nonprofits, she got fired. And there was some evidence that they were taking a harder look at these groups, but they also looked at liberal groups too. And it just so happened there were a lot more of the Tea Party groups. And to be honest, I wrote about some of these groups back then, and they were actually totally fair game for this kind of investigation because of what they were doing with their donations. So that's kind of where that comes from, I think. But I don't think there's any evidence that that's true today, certainly. And it's really a small part of what the IRS does, regulating nonprofits. I mean, most of the just basic functions are just getting people to pay the taxes that they owe. And actually, they are there to administer the tax code that Congress created, which, Congress just created a whole bunch of new tax credits and stuff that the IRS had to implement this year about like no taxes on tips and, tax credits for Social Security. And there's all sorts of child tax credits and all of these things that Congress keeps asking the IRS to do. And so their workload is directly related to some of those very same Republicans in Congress who want to, give away more money. So
This made me think, Stephanie, of the debates that, will never stop in this country about gun regulations. And, some people say we need more regulation, we need to be more stringent. Other people say we would be okay if we just fully enforced the gun regulations we have. And I was thinking maybe this is true as well of taxes. Like maybe we don't need to adjust any taxes or make anything higher. We just need to collect all the tax Congress has already said yes to.
that would definitely be a good start, I think. And I think that the thing that's interesting about the IRS and why it was so short-sighted to fire all these people who work there, like under the aegis of efficiency and saving money and rooting out fraud, but hiring people to work at the IRS, it pays for itself because every dollar or something you spend on the IRS comes back like it's $8 or $9 that they recover. So it's not like other agencies. Like it definitely pays for itself. And and functionally in a democracy, somebody has to collect the taxes. It's just part of making sure we have a functioning government. And it, is not something that in other countries, I think, is quite as politicized as it is here.
You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. What had the Biden administration, before this second Trump administration, done to try and rectify resource shortages within the IRS, which, as you said, had been building for years before even President Trump's first term?
Right. So I think that by the time the Inflation Reduction Act passed, the IRS had about the same number of employees that it had like in the 1960s, even though the population of the United States had like tripled. So, some of that obviously technology helped with, but really it was very much understaffed. And so Biden put in, I think it was about $80 million into the Inflation Reduction Act that was supposed to go to modernizing the IRS and beefing up enforcement and targeting, frankly, high net worth people who weren't paying their fair share. And so immediately Congress, got passed, and then Republicans have subsequently clawed back some of that money, or quite a bit of it, actually. And they started out with all these conspiracy theories. They accused Biden of wanting to hire 87,000 jackbooted thugs, armed IRS agents who were going to be fanning across the country to harass ordinary law-abiding citizens. And that just was not true. And especially, I thought about that a lot when I couldn't get anybody on the phone. But a lot of what that money went to really was also just making sure that the phones got answered. So when people had questions, like they needed help filing their tax returns and whatnot, they actually, I think the first year after Biden was able to staff up a little bit from that money, they answered 1 million more phone calls at the IRS. I mean, that's a basic function of government. Like, they were just trying to make it work better. And but eventually that got dialed back. And then once Trump took office, all of that was just thrown out the window.
You mentioned a report delivered to Congress in June from the Taxpayer Advocate Service. What is the Taxpayer Advocate Service?
Well, there is an office inside of the IRS that is there to help people with problems they might have with the IRS, and they function a little bit like kind of like an inspector general. They keep tabs on what kind of service the IRS is providing, and it's very much focused on taxpayer rights and how individuals interact with the office. And they have a lot of data about the phone call, how many phone calls are getting answered, and whether the people who answer the phone know what they're talking about, and that sort of thing.
So, did the report say the people who answer the phone know what they're talking about?
This one that I was looking at, I don't even think they got that far because so few phone calls were getting answered. I think they found that there were, I think in this last tax season, they answered 20% fewer calls during the filing season, and the hold times actually went up from anywhere from like 80 to 160%, depending on which line you were trying to call. And those voice bot systems that were supposed to like make up for the fact that there weren't humans, hardly anybody gets through to anyone through those things. Most people hate them and they get frustrated and they either hang up or they ask to be transferred to a live person.
Yeah, it seems like this would be an area where technology could help, but, not just at the IRS, at a lot of, private companies, they're not there yet. Like, if you have an incredibly simple request, like, you need one number, maybe they work. But if you have something complicated, for the most part, these voice bots are not going to help much.
Right. And the Biden administration had been working on improving the technology throughout the IRS, to find places where they could make it easier, things work better. I mean, they made the direct file, they made it possible for people to, more people to file their returns online for free. And Trump got rid of that, most of it, because, we wouldn't want the government to make your life easier and cheaper. And but also then when Trump came in and Doge took over, they fired 40% of the IT department at the IRS. So in
Wow.
order to make the technology work, you still need people to actually do the job. And they got rid of all those people. And the ones who were left apparently were were redeployed. A lot of them were just made to answer the phones during filing season because there are not enough customer service people in the agency. And then others went to work in the CEO's office. And it's unclear to me what exactly they were supposed to be doing there. But the IT department has been gutted at the IRS. So if there was a hope that technology might make things better, that just isn't happening.
It does seem really surprising that the Department of Government Efficiency, run by a guy who clearly loves and has excelled in the tech space, Elon Musk, um, you know, they could have made incredible changes, right? I guess it would have taken more time than going in and firing a third of the staff in a matter of a few weeks.
Right. And, I think they were actually surprised at how hard it is to do the tech upgrades because a lot of the technology that the agency runs on is so old. It breaks. There are people told me like there's always like that one person they're terrified is going to have a heart attack because if they do, like and like 100 years of institutional knowledge will go with them and no one will know how to make the system work anymore. It's kind of like that. And um, they, I think, had very little respect for the people who worked there and what the existing situation was.
Stephanie, how does anyone who tries to get, say, outstanding debt to the IRS paid off, how does that person know for certain that their case is resolved and they are off the hook and out of trouble?
That's a good question. I haven't figured that out. I mean, I think previously you could just call them and someone would be able to look it up on the, in the system. And I mean, I have to say, like, and people have yelled at me about this. Oh, the IRS has always been terrible. Well, yes, I mean, it hasn't always been terrible, but it's not always been easy to get a hold of people at the IRS, but it's definitely gotten a lot worse. And, and it's funny because when I talk to the lawyers who help people with this stuff, they said that, and even some ordinary taxpayers, when people do actually get a hold of somebody at the IRS, usually they have a decent experience. Like the people who work there are really committed to trying to help you. Like that's their job, is to, make things work for you, not to like be punitive and awful. And they're public servants. They're there to serve the public. And I honestly, but for my own case, like I have no idea. I got a new letter from the IRS that gave me the option for the first time of being able to upload my documents online. So I did that. And, there's a little code and a QR code too to help do that. And so I did it and I wrote a letter and put all my documents in. I have no idea where all that stuff went. There was no confirmation email. There was nothing. I just took a screenshot of the thing on the screen and hope for the best, but I haven't heard anything. There's nothing in my account that says we got your stuff and we're looking at it or, everything's fixed. So I really don't know.
How much ongoing anxiety does that cause you?
Well, actually writing the story made me feel better because I did talk to a lot of people who are experts in this stuff and they reassured me that like I would be able to get a hearing or I could ask for a hearing. Like no one was going to come and take my bank account before I, got this resolved. So that was good. But honestly, I felt like that what I learned while I was writing the story is one of the worst things that can happen to you is identity theft because the backlogs at the IRS for helping people who've been the victim of identity theft were bad for a long time and they've gotten even worse. And now it takes, according to one of these reports that I looked at, it takes on average 600 days to get your identity theft case resolved. And that is a ridiculously long amount of time. And it causes people all kinds of misery because, like, if you're owed a refund from the IRS, they won't give it to you because you've got this pending identity theft problem. And so there are a lot of people who, get the earned income tax credit. A lot of our social safety net comes through the tax code, child tax credits, the EITC, those are big ones. And so if you can't get your tax return and you can't get the refunds you're owed, you're missing out on like all this money that should be helping you and your family. And so there are real intangible consequences to having the IRS not function.
So just to clarify, if I understand this correctly, people might be thinking identity theft. basically what happens is that somebody files as if they are you with your information, and then the refund that you are actually due based on your earning and other qualifications, it populates into their bank account, or a check goes to them.
Right. Yes, I think that's a big part of it. I think there are various ways that can work, but that's the gist of it. And it can ruin your life. I mean, and the IRS is really backlogged in trying to fix those things.
Whatever division of the IRS is charged with like sending out menacing notices like the ones that you've received, to taxpayers that it says hasn't paid enough, still seems to be going strong. When you get a letter like that, Stephanie, based on just your own experience, is like the name of some IRS agent at the bottom so you can get in touch with them? Or is it just like on behalf of the entire federal government, you are in some trouble?
It is just that. It's like a very generic kind of but scary letter, and the phone numbers that they put on it aren't really specific. So you still have to go through those enormous phone trees even to get to the right place. Like after two or three phone trees, there's something like, "Did you receive a letter?" Yes, press one. Um, it's not the most efficient thing that way. And actually, the second letter I got had a different phone number on it, so I tried that, and it disconnected me right away. So yeah, there's no one at the other end to take your call.
You discovered that the worst service records have been attributed to phone lines set up for people who owe money and are trying to like set up a payment plan. That just seems counterintuitive.
I think it's partly because those calls require a little bit more time. People have to go through some hoops. But yes, there are those people. And, those are the people that are probably the most desperate because they actually do owe the money in, but they don't have it. And so there is a lot of backlog there.
So we sort of glossed over this before, but in between calling multiple times and failing to get anybody on the phone who could give you any information, and sending a letter to perhaps nowhere, you showed up in person to a taxpayer assistance center, which is a physical facility. How many of those are there around the country right now?
I actually didn't go to one. There, yeah, there were over 100 that were fully staffed at the end of the Biden administration. Trump has cut those down to, I think, 42. And there is one where I live, and I thought I would go to one, but then as I was researching this, I discovered that you're supposed to make an appointment before you can't just walk in. And the way to make an appointment, you have to call the IRS. And so I never got an appointment.
Do you know anything about the success people have if they are able to get an appointment and walk into one of those taxpayer assistance centers?
Yeah, I think they are pretty good. And in fact, after I wrote my story, several people called me or sent me emails saying, you could just try to go down there because actually sometimes they do just let you come in without an appointment. So I was like, okay, maybe that'll be my next strategy. But they do have the system, the computer, they have people who are trained to help you there. And I think that those places are actually pretty good. And if I took all my documentation, I would hope they would be able to do something with it.
Do you think that, I mean, the lack of resources at the IRS is because people who object to its very existence have just not had much trouble vilifying the agency in the minds of Americans?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's an easy target, right? Everyone hates the IRS. No one likes to pay taxes. But, I think in this sense, at least this past year, the IRS really isn't alone. I was doing a different story and I saw they fired 25% of the people who work in the National Park Service. And people love the Park Service. Everybody likes to go to national parks, but we fired all of those people too. So I think it's kind of an across the board shrinking of the federal government. And um, I think even the IRS has figured out, and even the Trump administration has realized at the IRS that they've gone too far, and they have made a move to try to rehire or hire a lot more people. I think they got permission to hire 8,000 people through September. I don't think they're having a lot of success on that level because they apparently won't hire back people who used to work there, which doesn't make any sense because those people might actually know how to do stuff. But they've really created a climate of distrust where people don't want to go work for the federal government because the old benefits that you would get from being a civil servant, the pay is not like super high, but there was a lot of stability in those jobs and benefits, and a lot of that has just gone away, and so people are finding other things to do.
When you say 8,000 jobs through September, do you mean like by September they would have hired 8,000 people, or those jobs end at the end of September?
It wasn't entirely clear. I think they were able to hire them. They always do seasonal hiring, like the IRS, like where I grew up. There, it was kind of great for women because they would hire people seasonally, and it kind of matched up with the school year. So people would work there while their kids were in school and then take the summers off. And so there's always been some of that. But this was a different batch of people. And the IRS never talked to me, so I was never able to clarify that. But they're having these hiring fairs, and they were saying that they were hiring people. So I think they realize, that if you also, if you're going to start a war that is costing billions and billions of dollars, eventually they're going to have to pay for it. And I think maybe they're realizing that if they don't beef up the IRS, they're going to have a serious, serious financial problem down the road.
Presumably, ethical tax preparers who are trying to do right by their clients are very much affected by this. I would imagine they're always trying not to make mistakes, but did you hear from them about anything that's changed about the way they try to do their work so that they don't find themselves like in this quagmire where they need a question answered and cannot find anyone to do so?
I think that, what a lot of them were just pulling their hair out because they used to spend more time with clients and, instead they're just sitting on hold with the IRS and they're getting disconnected and no one calls them back. They can't reach managers there. They're sending all these letters and, I think this is the thing also, the IRS is going to have this problem where people can't get through on phones. So now they're getting more mail and they can't answer the mail. So it's all these problems are piling up on each other. The tax preparers, I had talked to one guy, he had been doing this kind of work. He's a tax attorney, but he'd been doing it for almost 50 years. And he said he's never seen it this bad. And he had 4 or 5 or 6 cases that he's just completely stymied on. And, I think maybe I mentioned that people are just taking they're going to Congress. They're just going to see their Congress people and trying to get through that way because they've run out of ideas of what else they can do.
It would seem like congressional staffs would quickly get tired of having to intervene on this level. I mean, that's not precisely what they're set up to do, but it sounds like there hasn't been a whole lot of pushback. Or is there pushback like among Democrats but not Republicans?
There has been a little bit of pushback from some Democrats. I spoke with Congressman Richard Neal in Massachusetts, and he's on oh my gosh, which committee? One of the committees that oversees the IRS. And he was well aware of the problems that were happening. And I think he also questioned the CEO, the IRS CEO at the hearing in April about their performance. And so there has been some pushback. I think, the problem is the Democrats are in the minority. And so they just don't have the power in Congress to really do anything about this. And so these midterm elections are going to have all kinds of implications for exactly the sort of thing.
So let's assume that the Trump administration does move forward and hire these 8,000 people. I mean, that's still well down from where the IRS was just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, yeah. And, and people are still leaving. So, people retire, there's normal attrition. So it could be that 8,000 is only going to fill in people who are still just leaving this year and they end up with the net of the same numbers that they had before. So I don't know. It's going to take them decades to recover from this, I think.
And in the meantime, morale is not great?
Morale is not great. Charles Garn, who I talked to, he's still, it's funny, he's got a Dungeons and Dragons group that is made up of all of his friends who work at the IRS. So he still is got his ear to the ground there, and he said people are just miserable, and all the things they liked about working at the IRS. As much as people hate the IRS, people love working there. When I wrote about the service center in Ogden, like people really liked it. So it was a very friendly place to work. All of that's gone. Actually, and also they got rid of the union. So a lot of these people in Ogden had never had a union in their lives. There's no union jobs out there. And so they were pretty excited about it. Like it was participatory, like they had input in how the workplace ran. And the Trump administration has banned them from even putting union literature anywhere in the buildings.
We are now, if I'm not mistaken, in Q3 of 2026. I imagine maybe you're still sending off these quarterly payments. Did you do anything different this year to sort of make sure that you had evidence of those payments?
I wrote a check. I sent it snail mail. Yeah. Which isn't good. Like they have the mechanism to pay these things online, but I think, I did it last year a little bit hesitantly and it didn't work out very well. So I'm back to writing paper checks and sending them with the, certified mail so that I get a receipt that it was delivered and the checks were cashed and there is a paper copy of them somewhere. And that apparently has shown up. I was able to see that online. But yeah, I don't, it's not great for the agency to have everybody going back to paper again because, they need people to open all those letters in the mailroom.
Stephanie Mensimer is a senior reporter in the Washington Bureau of Mother Jones Magazine, where you can read her article, The IRS is Imploding. Stephanie, I'm sorry for your troubles, but I've learned a lot from your reporting, so thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a